Hello! Today we're going to go over how to graph the sine of x and the cosine of x from the unit circle. Over here you see our unit circle. We recall that all of these points represent the different x's and y's, or the different x's and y's here represent the different sine and cosine values on the unit circle, where the sine of x is the y value and the cosine of x is the x value, where x is the angle. In pre-calculus, for the most part, our angles will be in radians, and so my unit circle here is only in radians. If you would like to recall what the degree values are from radians or on the unit circle, you can look at yours. So let's look at this. So if I were to ask what is the sine of 0, I can go over to 0 and look at my y value there. My y value there is 0. So the sine of 0 is 0. The sine of pi over 4 is the square root of 2 over 2. The sine of pi over 2 is 1. So I can take all these values and I can plot them onto a graph. I created some simple graphs for this demonstration. Let's graph our sine values on this first graph. If I wanted to graph the sine of 0, I can look again at my unit circle and see that the sine of 0 is 0. So at 0, I can put the value of 0. I'm making this my sine of x graph. So on my y-axis will be the sine of x. And of course our x-axis will be the x value, or the radian value. The sine of pi over 6 is going to be 1/2. So if I can go to pi over 6 between, that's pi over 2, pi over 6 could be right here. So 1/2 might be right here. Or pi over 6, 1/2 would be right there. The sine of pi over 4, which is exactly halfway between 0 and pi over 2, is square root of 2 over 2, so that's a bit higher. The sine of pi over 3 is the square root of 3 over 2, which is getting closer and closer to 1. It's right there. And so finally, at pi over 2, the sine of pi over 2 is 1. So we get this nice arch here. For the sake of time, I will only now graph just the axes here. So the sine of pi is 0. The sine of 3 pi over 2 is -1. And the sine of 2 pi is back to 0. I'm now going to connect that with the same shape. I have this kind of curving shape. And because we know the unit circle goes the same way backwards, where this would be 0, this would be negative pi over 2, negative pi, negative 3 pi over 2, and negative 2 pi, I can plot those values as well. So at negative pi over 2, it would be -1. At negative pi, it would be 0. At negative 3 pi over 2 would be +1. And at negative 2 pi, it would be back to being 0. So this is the graph we get. That is my graph of sine of x. We call this type of graph periodic. A period just means something that repeats. And so this periodic function repeats multiple times. Let's do the same thing with cosine of x. Let's go back to our unit circle. For cosine of x, the cosine of 0 is 1. So on our graph, we'll start out with our cosine of 0 being at 1 rather than at 0. The cosine of pi over 2, remember the xi, is 0. The cosine of pi is negative 1. The cosine of 3 pi over 2 is back to being 0. And at 2 pi, our cosine is 1. And this function curves in the same way. If we go in the other direction, we'll see the same pattern. You can also graph these on Desmos or on your calculator to see a more accurate representation. And that's the end of the intro to graphing sine and cosine of x from the unit circle. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in person or to leave a comment on this if you're watching it on YouTube. Thanks, and have a great day.